Welcome back, my friend. Tonight we begin in a place where sea winds carry the scent of salt and wild herbs across rugged hills, and the sound of distant waves echoes against stone villages that seem untouched by time. You find yourself standing on the island of Corsica, where a child named Napoleon Bonaparte is born into a world that does not quite know what to do with him. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You can almost feel the uneven ground beneath your feet, hear the rustle of olive trees, and sense the tension in the air. This is not just a peaceful island paradise. It is a place shaped by conflict, recently absorbed by France, and still clinging to its fierce local identity. The people here do not easily forget who they are, and neither will the boy you are about to follow. If you pause for a moment, you notice something subtle yet powerful. He is not entirely at home here. His family carries a complicated loyalty, tied both to Corsican independence and to the rising authority of France. That tension settles quietly into his childhood, like a low, constant hum that never quite fades. Your mind drifts to the small house where he grows up modest, but filled with ambition. His father, a lawyer with aspirations, sees opportunity in aligning with French rule. His mother, strong and disciplined, shapes the household with a firm hand. You can almost hear her voice steady and commanding, guiding her children through hardship with unwavering resolve. Records confirm that University of Oxford historians have emphasized how this dual identity deeply influenced Napoleon's early worldview, creating in him both an outsider's sensitivity and an insider's ambition. It is not just where he comes from, but how he learns to navigate belonging and exclusion at the same time. And so you begin to notice his temperament. Quiet, observant, not easily distracted. While other children play, he watches, he listens, he absorbs. There is a certain distance in him, as though he is already measuring the world rather than simply living in it. A curious footnote, often mentioned by scholars, is that he spoke French with a noticeable accent throughout his early years, something that marked him as different when he later left the island. You can imagine the subtle sting of that difference, the way small remarks from others might linger longer than they should. For a moment it feels as though you're walking beside him along a narrow path overlooking the sea. The wind presses gently against your skin. He is thinking, always thinking, not yet of empires or crowns, but of something more immediate, recognition, control. A place where he cannot be dismissed. Scholars bicker over how much his Corsican roots truly defined his later ambitions. Some, including voices from Harvard University, argue that his early exposure to political struggle planted the seeds of his future strategies. Others suggest his identity evolved rapidly once he entered mainland France, leaving Corsica more as a memory than a guiding force. The truth, as you sense, likely rests somewhere in between. The light shifts as the day moves on, casting long shadows across the hills. You notice how young Napoleon responds to stories of heroes and leaders, particularly those who rise from obscurity. There is a spark in him then, something that flickers just beneath the surface, not loud, not obvious, but unmistakable. You begin to understand that ambition does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it grows quietly, like roots pushing through stone. In your ears, the distant sound of village life blends with the rhythm of the sea. It feels calm, almost peaceful, yet there is an undercurrent of urgency. Corsica is changing. France is changing. The entire continent, though you cannot yet see, it is inching toward upheaval. He senses it too. You watch as he learns, quickly absorbing lessons, not just from books, but from the world around him. Power is not given freely. Loyalty is fragile. Identity can be both a weapon and a burden. These are not lessons most children carry, but he does. The air grows cooler as evening approaches. A faint scent of wood smoke drifts through the village, mixing with the salt of the sea. You feel a stillness settle, in the kind that invites reflection. This is where it begins, not with glory, not with triumph, but with a boy who does not quite belong standing on an island that itself is caught between worlds. And in that shared uncertainty, something powerful is quietly taking shape. You remain beside him as darkness slowly gathers, sensing that this quiet beginning holds within it the outline of something vast and unstoppable. The story has not yet unfolded, but already you can feel its weight. Now dim the lights. The air shifts as you leave the rugged warmth of Corsica behind, trading the scent of salt and herbs for the colder, sharper atmosphere of mainland France. You travel with the young Napoleon Bonaparte, not by choice but by necessity, as his family sends him away to pursue an education that promises opportunity, yet quietly demands sacrifice. Your mind settles into the rhythm of the journey, the gentle sway of movement, the unfamiliar language, filling the air more completely with each passing mile. He listens carefully, absorbing sounds, shaping them slowly on his tongue. It is not easy, nothing here comes easily. When you arrive at the military school in Brienne-le-Château, the atmosphere feels different at once. The walls are thick, the corridors echo with footsteps, and the discipline is immediate and unforgiving. You sense the weight of expectation pressing in from every direction. This is not a place for comfort. You notice how he carries himself, slightly withdrawn, alert, determined not to reveal weakness. Other boys, many from wealthier French families, move with an ease he does not possess. Their laughter feels distant, almost foreign. He watches them, just as he once watched the waves along the Corsican coast. Records confirm that scholars from University of Cambridge have noted how his early years at Brienne were marked by both academic strength and social isolation, particularly due to his accent and modest background. These details, often overlooked, form a quiet but persistent pressure that shapes his inner world. You can almost hear the faint scrape of quill on paper as he studies late into the evening. Mathematics draws him in with a strange comfort. Numbers are consistent, logical. They do not mock or exclude. They simply exist, waiting to be understood. A curious aside often mentioned by historians is that he showed a particular fascination with artillery from an early age, not because of its noise or destruction, but because it combined calculation with power. Precision mattered. Angles mattered. Control mattered. Even now you sense how deeply that idea resonates within him. The cold creeps in during winter months, settling into stone walls and narrow dormitories. You feel it in your hands, in your breath, in the quiet stillness of night. He endures it without complaint. Endurance becomes a habit. There are moments, though, when the silence grows heavier. You notice him standing alone, looking outward, as if searching for something beyond the school grounds. Perhaps it is familiarity, perhaps it is belonging, or perhaps it is something he cannot yet name. Scholars continue to debate the extent to which this isolation fueled his ambition. Some researchers from Stanford University suggest that his outsider status sharpened his competitive drive, pushing him toward excellence as a form of self-definition. Others argue that such experiences may have also contributed to a lifelong tendency toward emotional distance. The arguments drift quietly, unresolved. In your ears, the echo of marching drills becomes steady and predictable. Boots strike the ground in unison. Commands are given and followed without hesitation. Discipline is not optional here. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. You begin to notice how he adapts, not by blending in, but by refining himself. He studies harder, observes more closely, speaks less but with greater precision when he does. There is a quiet transformation, unfolding one that does not demand attention, but steadily earns it. Time passes in measured increments, lessons, drills, silence, repetition, each day layering upon the last building something invisible yet undeniable. Then gradually a shift. You sense it in the way instructors begin to regard him. Not warmly, not yet, but with a certain recognition. His abilities cannot be ignored. His focus is unwavering. His mind works quickly, often ahead of those around him. A council record cited by historians at University of Chicago indicates that he ranked highly in subjects related to military science, particularly artillery. This is not simply academic success. It is alignment between talent and purpose. The evenings grow quieter as you remain beside him. The distant murmur of other students fades into the background. He is not part of their world, not fully, and yet he is carving out his own. You feel a strange calm in this realization. He does not need to belong in the way others do. He is building something else. The scent of candle wax lingers in the air as he continues to study long after others have rested. His movements are deliberate, efficient. There is little wasted energy. Even now you sense the early formation of habits that will one day define armies. For a moment it feels as though time itself slows, allowing you to observe the details more clearly. The steady rise and fall of his breath, the faint tension in his posture, the quiet persistence that refuses to fade. No agreement has been reached on whether these years were the most formative of his life, or merely the beginning of a longer transformation. Yet as you stand here watching him, in this quiet, disciplined world, it becomes difficult to dismiss their importance. This is where resilience takes root, not in moments of glory, but in long stretches of effort that few will ever see. The night deepens around you, wrapping the school in stillness. Somewhere in the distance, a door closes softly. The world feels contained, focused, almost suspended. And within that stillness, the boy from Corsica continues to shape himself. One thought, one calculation, one quiet decision at a time. You remain beside him, aware that each of these small moments is quietly preparing him for something far greater than anyone here can yet imagine. The rhythm of disciplined school life slowly fades behind you, replaced by something far less predictable. As you continue beside Napoleon Bonaparte, the air itself seems charged with tension, as though the ground beneath France is beginning to shift in ways no one can fully control. Your senses awaken to a new kind of energy. Streets grow louder, voices carry urgency. Conversations are no longer about lessons or rank, but about rights, power and change. You feel it in the quickened pace of footsteps, in the restless murmur of crowds gathering in public squares. For a moment it feels as though you are standing at the edge of something vast and uncertain. This is the beginning of the French Revolution. You notice how he watches it all unfold, just as he once observed the sea and the students around him. But now his attention carries a sharper edge. This is not distant. This is opportunity. Records confirm that historians from Princeton University have emphasized how the revolution created rapid openings within the military, allowing talented officers of modest background to rise in ways previously impossible. For someone like Napoleon, this moment is not chaos alone. It is a door suddenly unlocked. The smell of smoke drifts faintly through the air, mixed with the press of bodies and the sound of voices raised in heated debate. You can almost feel the tension in your chest, the sense that old structures are cracking under pressure. He steps forward carefully, not recklessly, never recklessly. You begin to see how his earlier years of isolation and discipline now serve him. Where others react emotionally, he calculates. Where others shout, he studies. His mind moves through the turmoil like a quiet current beneath a storm. A curious footnote, often mentioned by historians, is that he initially supported Corsican independence, even during the early stages of the revolution, aligning himself with local leaders before eventually shifting his loyalty fully to France. You sense the weight of that decision. It is not just political, it is personal. For a brief moment, you can almost feel the pull between two identities again, just as in his childhood. And then slowly, decisively, he lets one go. The streets of cities like Paris become the stage upon which history begins to accelerate. Crowds gather. Institutions crumble. Authority is questioned in ways that would have once seemed unthinkable. You walk beside him as he navigates this changing world, not yet at the centre, but no longer at the edges either. Scholars continue to debate whether his rise during this period was driven more by ideological belief or personal ambition. Some researchers from Yale University argue that he genuinely embraced revolutionary principles of merit and equality. Others suggest that he recognized early on how these ideals could serve as tools for advancement. The truth remains layered, complex, and quietly unresolved. In your ears, the soundscape shifts constantly. One moment the measured rhythm of marching soldiers, the next the chaotic surge of voices demanding change. It is a world in motion, and he moves within it with increasing confidence. You begin to notice how quickly he adapts to new circumstances. Assignments come and go, positions shift, loyalties are tested, yet he remains steady, guided, not by impulse, but by a growing sense of direction. A decree referenced by historians at Columbia University indicates that revolutionary reforms opened officer ranks to those previously excluded by aristocratic privilege. This structural shift is not abstract. It directly shapes his path, allowing his abilities to be recognized and utilized. The air feels heavier now, as though carrying the weight of countless decisions being made all at once. You sense both possibility and danger intertwined. There are moments of uncertainty, moments where the outcome is far from clear. But he does not retreat. Instead, he leans in. You watch as he studies maps, observes troop movements, and begins to think, not just as a student, but as a strategist. The transformation is subtle yet unmistakable. For a moment it feels as though time folds inward, drawing past and future closer together. The quiet boy from Corsica, the isolated student at Brienne, and the emerging officer in revolutionary France all exist within him at once. The scent of damp stone and smoke lingers as evening settles over the city. Shadows stretch across narrow streets, and the distant glow of torchlight flickers against walls. You remain beside him, aware that this is only the beginning of a much larger ascent. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding how much chance versus skill defined his early advancement. Some voices, including those connected to University of California, emphasize the role of timing and circumstance. Others point to his undeniable talent and preparation. As you watch him now, it becomes difficult to separate the two. Opportunity may open the door, but it does not decide who walks through it. He does. The night deepens and the restless energy of revolution continues to pulse through the streets. You can feel it in the air and the ground beneath your feet, in the steady, unwavering focus of the man walking beside you. Something has shifted, not just in France, but within him. And as you follow his steps into this uncertain world, you begin to understand that history is not only shaped by great events, but by those who recognize them as they unfold. The restless pulse of revolution carries you forward, and the noise of crowded streets slowly gives way to something sharper, more focused. The scent of smoke thickens not from distant unrest now, but from cannon fire. You stand with Napoleon Bonaparte at the edge of a moment that feels heavier than the chaos that came before. Ahead lies Toulon, a harbour city where the sea glints under a pale sky, and ships rest like silent witnesses to the coming storm. The wind carries salt and ash together, a strange mixture that settles into your breath. This is no longer theory or observation. This is command. You sense his focus tighten as he studies the landscape. Hills, fortifications, artillery positions. Everything is measured, weighed, and quietly arranged in his mind. Where others see confusion, he sees structure. Records confirm that historians from Stanford University have highlighted the siege of Toulon as the first clear demonstration of Napoleon's tactical genius, particularly his understanding of artillery placement. It is here that his ideas begin to translate into decisive action. You watch as he moves among soldiers, not with loud authority, but with calm precision. His voice is steady. His instructions are clear. There is no wasted motion, no unnecessary display. Even now he conserves energy, directing it only where it matters most. A curious aside often mentioned in military accounts is that he quickly identified the key strategic point of the harbour, a position later known as Little Gibraltar, realising that controlling it would force enemy ships to withdraw. It sounds simple when spoken aloud, but in the chaos of war, such clarity is rare. You feel the ground tremble faintly as artillery fires in the distance. The sound rolls across the landscape, deep and echoing like distant thunder. Smoke drifts slowly upward, softening the edges of the horizon. For a moment it feels unreal, and yet every decision here carries weight. You notice how he remains composed, even as pressure builds around him. Supplies are limited, time is uncertain, the outcome is far from guaranteed. Still, he does not hesitate. Instead, he calculates. Scholars continue to debate whether his success at Toulon was primarily the result of individual brilliance or the product of favourable circumstances within a larger military effort. Some researchers from University of Oxford argue that while the broader strategy involved multiple commanders, Napoleon's specific contributions were decisive in securing victory. Others suggest that his role, though important, has been magnified over time. The discussion remains open, shifting gently, like the tide beyond the harbour. You remain beside him as plans are set into motion. Cannons are repositioned under his direction, carefully aligned to maximise impact. Each movement is deliberate. Each adjustment carries intent. The air grows thicker with the smell of powder and earth. You hear the creak of wheels as artillery is dragged into place, the quiet strain of effort shared among soldiers who may not yet fully understand the importance of what they are doing. But he understands. And that is enough. The assault begins to take shape, not as a sudden burst of chaos, but as a controlled unfolding. You sense how each element connects to the next, forming a pattern that only becomes visible once it is already in motion. There is a moment, brief but unmistakable, when everything aligns. Then comes the shift. Enemy defences falter under sustained pressure. Positions once thought secure begin to weaken. The harbour, so central to control, becomes vulnerable. You feel the change ripple outward, subtle at first, then undeniable. Victory is not declared loudly here. It reveals itself gradually. A council record, referenced by historians at University of Cambridge, indicates that following the success at Toulon, Napoleon was promoted to brigadier general at a remarkably young age. This is not just recognition, it is acceleration. You sense it immediately. Something has changed in how others see him, and perhaps more importantly in how he sees himself. The evening light softens as the battle settles, casting long shadows across the battered landscape. The sounds of conflict fade into quieter movements, the aftermath replacing the intensity of action. You stand with him overlooking the harbour where ships that once symbolised opposition now drift away, their presence diminished. There is no celebration in his expression, only reflection, perhaps calculation, perhaps both. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether Toulon marked the true beginning of his rise, or merely the first visible step in a longer journey. Some voices from Yale University suggest that without this moment, his path may have unfolded very differently. Others believe his talents would have found another stage regardless. As you stand here, it becomes clear that moments like these do not create destiny alone, but they certainly reveal it. The wind shifts again, carrying the distant sound of waves against the shore. The scent of smoke begins to fade, replaced slowly by the familiar presence of the sea. You remain beside him as night approaches, aware that this is no longer the uncertain observer of earlier days. This is a man who has tasted command and found it to his liking. The calm settles in, but beneath it, something continues to move. Forward, always forward. The echo of cannon fire fades behind you, but its impact lingers in quieter, more complicated ways. As you remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte, the world around you feels less like a battlefield and more like a shifting maze of loyalties, alliances, and sudden danger. The air carries not just the scent of smoke now, but something subtler, suspicion. You move through the unsettled atmosphere of revolutionary France, where power changes hands quickly, and yesterday's hero can become tomorrow's liability. The streets feel tense, conversations hushed, as though everyone senses how fragile their position might be. For a moment it feels as though the ground itself is uncertain. You notice how he adjusts to this environment with the same careful precision he once applied to artillery. He speaks less, observes more. Every decision seems measured against unseen risks. Survival here is no longer about strength alone. It is about timing. Records confirm that historians from Columbia University have emphasized how officers during this phase of the revolution often face sudden arrest or dismissal due to shifting political tides. Advancement came with exposure, visibility brought danger. You can almost feel that tension settle into your chest. A curious aside often mentioned in accounts of this period is that Napoleon himself was briefly arrested in 1794 due to his associations with certain political figures. The moment passes quickly in many narratives, but you sense its significance. Even rising talent is not immune to suspicion. Cold uncertainty. That is the atmosphere now. You remain beside him as he navigates these unstable currents, never fully secure, never entirely at ease. Yet he does not retreat. Instead, he adapts again. You notice how his ambition becomes quieter, more controlled. It no longer pushes outward recklessly. It waits, watches, chooses its moments carefully. The scent of damp stone fills the air as you move through narrow corridors and administrative halls, places where decisions are made, not with cannon fire, but with signatures and whispers. You begin to understand that power here is just as dangerous as any battlefield. Scholars continue to debate how much of his survival during this volatile period was due to calculated strategy versus simple fortune. Some researchers from University of Chicago argue that his ability to distance himself from fallen factions demonstrates a keen political instinct. Others suggest that timing and circumstance played an equally critical role. The balance between these explanations remains uncertain. In your ears, the sounds of revolution feel different now. Less explosive, more restrained. The tension has not disappeared. It has condensed, becoming sharper and more unpredictable. You watch as he begins to build connections carefully, aligning himself with individuals who hold influence, yet never fully committing beyond what is necessary. It is a delicate balance, one that requires constant awareness. A decree referenced by historians at Princeton University highlights how military leadership during this period depended heavily on political alignment as much as tactical ability. This is not a system of stability. It is a landscape of shifting ground. You sense how deeply he understands this. For a moment, it feels as though you are standing just behind him as he weighs each choice. The pause before speaking, the careful selection of words, the decision to step forward or remain still. Nothing is accidental. Even silence has purpose. The air grows heavy as evening settles over the city, carrying with it the faint scent of candle smoke and damp earth. Shadows stretch across the walls, softening edges, obscuring details. It feels fitting. This is a time where clarity is rare and certainty even rarer. You notice how he continues to study not just military matters, but people, their motives, their weaknesses, their ambitions. It is a different kind of battlefield, one without clear lines or visible enemies. And yet he navigates it, slowly, carefully, effectively. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether this period hardened his character or simply revealed traits that were already present. Some voices from Yale University suggest that the constant threat of downfall reinforced his reliance on control and decisiveness. Others believe these qualities were already firmly established during his earlier years. As you watch him now, it feels less like a change and more like a sharpening. The world around you remains unstable, but he grows steadier within it. That contrast is striking. You begin to sense how resilience is not only built through hardship, but through adaptation to uncertainty. It is not about eliminating risk. It is about moving through it without losing direction. The distant sound of footsteps echoes through a corridor, then fades. A door closes softly, somewhere beyond your view. The city breathes in slow, uneven rhythms. You remain beside him, aware that survival here is not a passive state. It is an active process, one that demands constant attention. And he gives it, without hesitation, without complaint. As night deepens, a quiet clarity begins to emerge. The chaos of revolution has not disappeared, but he has learned how to move within it. Not as a victim, not as a bystander, but as a participant, one who waits for the right moment, one who recognizes opportunity even when it is hidden beneath uncertainty. You sense that such a moment is approaching, not loudly, not suddenly, but inevitably. And as you stand there in the dim light, surrounded by the quiet tension of a world still in flux, you begin to understand that survival alone is no longer enough. He is preparing for something more. The tension that once pressed in from every direction now begins to shift into motion, carrying you southward across the varied landscapes of Italy. The air feels lighter here, touched by sun and the faint scent of vineyards, yet beneath that warmth lies something electric. You travel beside Napoleon Bonaparte as he steps into a new phase of his life, one defined not by survival, but by bold action. For a moment, it feels as though everything has accelerated. He has been given command of the army of Italy, a force that is underfed, poorly equipped, and weary from neglect. You can sense the doubt that surrounds them, not openly expressed, but quietly present in the way soldiers move and speak. Yet he does not mirror that doubt. Instead, he speaks to them with a calm intensity, promising not comfort, but opportunity. Glory, yes, but also survival through movement, through initiative, through striking before being struck. Records confirm that historians from Harvard University have emphasized how Napoleon's early Italian campaign transformed a struggling army into a highly effective force through rapid maneuvering and decisive engagements. It was not just leadership, it was transformation. You begin to notice how he moves differently now, more assured, more direct. His earlier restraint remains, but it is now paired with a willingness to act quickly, almost unexpectedly. The ground beneath your feet shifts as you follow the army through narrow passes and open plains. The scent of dust rises with each step, blending with the distant aroma of cooking fires and worn leather. The rhythm of marching becomes steady, almost hypnotic. Then comes the first clash. You feel it before you see it, the tension tightening the air, thickening with anticipation. Orders are given, positions are taken, and suddenly everything unfolds. Fast as, precise, controlled. A curious footnote, often mentioned by historians, is how Napoleon frequently divided enemy forces and attacked them separately, a tactic that allowed his smaller army to achieve disproportionate victories. It sounds almost simple, but in practice it requires extraordinary timing and awareness. You remain beside him as he directs movements with clarity that cuts through the chaos. He does not shout unnecessarily, he does not hesitate. His commands flow with a rhythm that matches the unfolding battle. The sound of artillery rolls across the landscape, but now it feels different from Toulon. More fluid, less contained. This is movement, not siege. Momentum, not endurance. Scholars continue to debate whether his success in Italy was primarily due to innovative tactics or the weakened condition of opposing forces. Some researchers from University of Oxford argue that his strategic brilliance reshaped military thinking. Others suggest that his opponents were fragmented and poorly coordinated. As you watch him now, the distinction feels less important than the outcome. Victory follows victory, not slowly, not cautiously, but in a sequence that begins to feel almost inevitable. You notice how the soldiers respond to this shift. Their posture changes, their voices carry more confidence. Where there was once doubt, there is now belief, not just in the cause, but in the man leading them. A military record referenced by historians at University of Cambridge indicates that the Italian campaign resulted in significant territorial gains for France and elevated Napoleon's reputation dramatically. This is no longer quiet recognition, this is prominence. You sense it clearly. His name begins to carry weight. The evenings grow richer with the scent of earth and distant harvests as you move through newly captured regions. The contrast is striking. One moment the intensity of battle, the next the quiet stillness of countryside life, continuing almost untouched. You walk beside him as he surveys these lands, not with wonder, but with calculation. Resources, position, advantage, every detail feeds into a larger vision that is beginning to take shape. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether this campaign revealed his long-term ambitions or simply accelerated them. Some voices from Stanford University suggest that Italy marked the point where he began to see himself as more than a general. Others believe that ambition had always been present, waiting only for the right conditions as you stand here. Watching his steady gaze across the landscape, it feels less like a beginning and more like a revelation. You begin to understand that momentum itself can become a form of power. Each victory builds upon the last, creating a rhythm that is difficult to break. Opponents struggle to adapt. Allies begin to trust. The path forward seems to open naturally, though you sense how carefully it is being shaped. The sound of distant bells drifts through the evening air, soft and steady, marking time. In a world that continues to move regardless of conquest or conflict, you remain beside him, aware that something fundamental has changed. He is no longer navigating uncertainty. He is creating direction. The calm settles in as night approaches, wrapping the army in a quiet that feels earned rather than imposed. Fires flicker gently, voices lower, movement slows, and yet beneath that calm there is no stillness, only forward motion, always forward. The rhythm of marching softens as you move deeper into lands now shaped by victory, where the sharp edge of battle gives way to something more subtle. The air feels warmer, touched by the scent of citrus and dust, and the sound of distant conversation carries with a lighter tone. Yet, as you remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte, you sense that another kind of campaign is quietly unfolding. Not of armies, but of image. For a moment it feels as though the world slows, allowing space for reflection between triumphs. Letters are written, reports are sent, stories begin to spread not just of victories but of the man who leads them. You notice how carefully these stories are shaped. Records confirm that historians from Yale University have highlighted Napoleon's early use of bulletins and public messaging to craft a heroic narrative around his campaigns, emphasizing success while downplaying setbacks. It is not deception alone, it is construction. A reputation built piece by piece. You walk beside him as he dictates these accounts, his tone measured, his words precise. He understands that perception carries power equal to any battlefield victory, perhaps even greater. A curious aside, often mentioned in historical accounts, is that he frequently exaggerated enemy numbers in his reports, making his victories appear even more remarkable. It is a small detail, yet it reveals something important. He is not only winning battles, he is shaping how those battles are remembered. The scent of ink and parchment lingers as messages are sealed and sent across France. Each one carries not just information, but intention. You begin to notice how his name travels faster than his army now, and it grows with each retelling. At the same time, another presence enters the quiet space around him. Josephine de Beauharnais. Her influence is not loud, yet it is unmistakable. She brings with her a different kind of connection, one rooted in emotion rather than strategy. You sense how this relationship adds a new dimension to his life, one that contrasts with the discipline and calculation that define his public persona. Letters between them carry warmth, longing, and at times frustration. They reveal a side of him rarely seen by others. For a moment it feels almost human, almost ordinary. Scholars continue to debate the depth of their emotional connection. Some researchers from Princeton University suggest that his affection for Josephine was genuine and deeply felt, particularly in the early years. Others argue that their relationship became increasingly complex, shaped by ambition and circumstance. The truth, as you sense, shifts over time. You remain beside him as he moves between these worlds. The battlefield and the written word, strategy and sentiment, public image and private feeling. The contrast is striking. A council record, referenced by historians at University of Chicago, indicates that his growing popularity in France began to influence political perceptions, positioning him not just as a military leader, but as a national figure. This is no longer confined to the army. This is expansion of influence. You begin to understand how power can extend beyond physical control. It can exist in ideas, in stories, in the way people speak a name with admiration or expectation. The evenings grow quieter as you stand with him, the distant sounds of camp life fading into a soft background hum. The scent of wax and paper remains grounding you in this moment of transition. You notice how he reflects, though, never for long. There is always another message to send, another plan, to consider, another step forward to take. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether his use of propaganda was a natural extension of his strategic mind or a deliberate manipulation of public perception. Some voices from Columbia University suggest that he intuitively understood the power of narrative in shaping political reality. Others argue that such practices were common among leaders of the time, though rarely executed with such precision. As you observe him now, it feels less like imitation and more like mastery. The light softens as evening deepens, casting a warm glow across the landscape. Shadows stretch gently, blending into the stillnesses that follows over. You remain beside him, aware that his victories now exist in two forms. The ones fought and the ones told. Both matter, both endure. The calm settles around you, yet beneath it, something continues to build. Not just ambition, but identity. Not just action, but legacy. And as you stand there listening to the quiet scratch of pen on paper and the distant murmur of voices, you begin to understand that history is not only shaped by what happens, but by how it is remembered. The warmth of the Italian countryside fades behind you, replaced by a brighter, sharper light that seems to stretch endlessly across the horizon. The air grows dry, carrying the faint scent of sand and distant water. As you remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte, you feel a shift not only in landscape but in intention. You are no longer moving through familiar territory. You are crossing into ambition that reaches beyond Europe. Ahead lies Egypt, a land that feels ancient even in your own time, where towering monuments rise from the desert as silent witnesses to civilizations long past. The light here is different, harsher, more revealing. For a moment it feels as though time itself has stretched. You step onto the shore with him, the sound of waves replaced quickly by the quiet vastness of sand. The horizon seems endless, almost unreal, and yet every movement here carries consequence. Records confirm that historians from University of Cambridge have emphasized that the Egyptian campaign was not purely military, but also scientific and cultural, including a large group of scholars who documented the land, its history, and its natural world. This is conquest, but also curiosity. You begin to notice how he regards this place with a different kind of attention, not just as territory to control, but as something to understand, perhaps even to possess in a broader sense. A curious footnote often mentioned in accounts of this campaign is the discovery of the Rosetta Stone by French soldiers, an object that would later become key to deciphering ancient Egyptian writing. It is a small moment within a vast campaign, yet its impact will echo far beyond this desert. The heat settles around you, pressing gently but persistently. You feel it in your skin, in your breath, in the slow rhythm of movement across the sand. Everything here requires adaptation, and adaptation, as you have seen, is something he understands well. You follow as the army advances, facing not only unfamiliar terrain, but also resistance that does not follow the patterns of European warfare. The rules feel different. The environment itself becomes a factor in every decision. Scholars continue to debate the true objectives behind this expedition. Some researchers from Harvard University argue that Napoleon sought to weaken British influence by threatening routes to India. Others suggest that personal ambition and a desire for glory played an equally significant role. The motivations remain layered, shifting like the sands beneath your feet. You sense how these uncertainties shape the campaign. There are moments of brilliance, swift victories that reinforce his confidence and command. Yet there are also challenges that do not yield so easily. The Battle of the Pyramids unfolds with a kind of stark clarity. You stand at a distance watching formations align with precision against an opponent that moves differently, fights differently. The contrast is striking, the outcome decisive. A military record referenced by historians at Princeton University indicates that Napoleon's use of defensive formations allowed his forces to withstand cavalry charges, effectively securing a key victory early in the campaign. It is another demonstration of his ability to adapt strategy to circumstance. Yet even as success unfolds on land, something shifts beyond your immediate view. The sea, the British fleet. You feel the change before it is fully understood. A quiet tension, a disruption in the balance. The destruction of the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile isolates the army, cutting off a vital connection to France. The realization settles slowly, like the heat at midday. Escape is no longer simple. You remain beside him as this new reality takes hold. His expression does not reveal panic. It rarely does. But you sense the recalculation already underway. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether the Egyptian campaign should be seen as a bold strategic vision or a costly miscalculation. Some voices from Stanford University highlight its intellectual and cultural contributions. Others emphasize the logistical challenges and ultimate failure to achieve its primary objectives. As you stand here, both perspectives feel present. The nights in the desert bring a different kind of stillness. The heat recedes, replaced by a cooler air that carries the faint scent of dust and distant water. The sky stretches wide above you, filled with stars that seem closer than before. You stand with him in that quiet, aware that this campaign is unlike any that came before. It is broader, more uncertain, more exposed. You notice how he continues to project confidence, maintaining order, guiding his army through conditions that would unsettle many others. Yet beneath that steady exterior, you sense the complexity of the situation. Victory is no longer straightforward. Control is no longer complete. And still he moves forward. The calm of the desert night settles around you, wrapping the world in a silence that feels almost timeless. You remain beside him, aware that even here, far from the centers of power, his story continues to unfold, not always as planned, but always in motion. The desert night lingers in your memory as you feel a sudden shift, a turning of direction that seems both abrupt and carefully calculated. The warm stillness of Egypt fades behind you as Napoleon Bonaparte makes a decision that carries the weight of risk and urgency. He leaves, not with ceremony, not with explanation that satisfies everyone, but with quiet determination, slipping away from a campaign that has grown uncertain, returning across the sea toward a homeland that is once again in flux. For a moment it feels almost unreal. You follow him back toward France, where the air feels different, charged with instability rather than distant ambition. The revolution has not settled. It has shifted into a new phase marked by political fatigue, corruption, and a growing desire for order. You sense it immediately. A kind of exhaustion. The government known as the Directory struggles to maintain control. Decisions feel fragmented. Authority feels thin. The people once energized by revolutionary ideals now seem to long for stability, for clarity, for something solid. Records confirm that historians from University of Chicago have emphasized how the Directory's weakening authority created conditions that made a political takeover increasingly possible. It was not simply ambition that drove events, but opportunity shaped by instability. You remain beside him as he observes this environment with the same measured focus you have seen before. He does not rush forward blindly. He studies, waits, aligns himself with key figures who share his recognition of the moment. A curious aside often mentioned in accounts of this period is how quickly his reputation, built in Italy and sustained despite the setbacks in Egypt, regained strength upon his return. Public perception, shaped so carefully before, continues to work in his favour. you begin to see how past actions echo into the present. The scent of candle wax and ink fills the rooms where plans are discussed, voices low and deliberate. There is tension here, but also a sense of inevitability, as though events are converging toward a single point. For a moment it feels as though you are standing just behind him as decisions are made. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. The plan unfolds, the coup of 18 Brumaire. Though the name may sound distant, you feel its immediacy. This is not an abstract event. It is a sequence of actions carefully coordinated, executed with precision. Scholars continue to debate the extent to which Napoleon himself orchestrated the coup versus the influence of political allies who sought his support. Some researchers from Yale University argue that he was the central driving force, recognizing and seizing the moment with clarity. Others suggest that he was at least initially part of a broader coalition seeking change. The distinctions blur as events unfold. You move with him through the tense atmosphere of Paris where soldiers gather, politicians hesitate, and uncertainty hangs in the air like a quiet storm. Then the shift. Power changes hands. Not with the roar of revolution this time, but with controlled force and calculated presence. Resistance appears, but it is overcome. The old structure collapses, replaced by something new. You feel the weight of that transition settle around you. A council record referenced by historians at Princeton University indicates that the establishment of the consulate placed Napoleon in the position of first consul, granting him significant authority over the government. This is not absolute power yet, but it is close. Very close. You notice how he carries this new role, not with visible triumph, but with quiet certainty. The rooms feel different now. Less chaotic, more ordered. Decisions move more quickly. Authority feels centralized, focused. You begin to understand how power once gained reshapes the environment around it. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether this moment marked the end of the revolution or its transformation into a new form. Some voices from Columbia University suggest that the ideals of the revolution were preserved in structure even as power became concentrated. Others argue that this was a clear departure, a shift toward personal rule as you stand here. Both interpretations seem to exist at once. The evening settles over the city, bringing with it a calm that feels deliberate rather than natural. The sounds of unrest have quieted, replaced by a more measured rhythm of governance. You remain beside him, aware that this moment changes everything. He is no longer rising through ranks. He stands at the center. The path ahead is no longer about gaining power. It is about shaping it. The air feels still, almost suspended, as though the world is pausing briefly before the next movement begins. And you sense clearly now that what comes next will reach far beyond the borders of France. The quiet order that settles over Paris feels almost unfamiliar after so many years of unrest. The air carries a softer rhythm, now touched by the faint scent of parchment-polished wood and distant rain against stone streets. As you remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte, you begin to sense that his focus has shifted once again. Not away from power, but deeper into it. For a moment it feels as though the noise of battle has been replaced by something quieter, yet no less significant. Decisions are made in rooms rather than on fields. Ink replaces gunpowder. Laws take the place of commands. And yet the impact may be even greater. You watch as he moves through halls of governance, his presence steady, his pace deliberate. He is no longer reacting to events. He is shaping them. Records confirm that historians from Harvard University have emphasized the lasting importance of the Napoleonic Code, a comprehensive legal reform that standardized laws across France and influenced legal systems around the world. It is not simply administration. it is transformation. You can almost hear the quiet scratch of quills as legal minds gather, drafting, debating, refining. The atmosphere is focused, almost meditative, yet beneath it lies a profound shift in how society functions. A curious aside often noted by scholars is that the Napoleonic Code removed many privileges based on birth, reinforcing the idea that individuals could advance based on merit. It is a principle that echoes the very opportunities that once allowed him to rise. You begin to see how his personal experience shapes broader policy. The scent of wax seals and paper lingers as documents are finalized, each one carrying authority that extends far beyond the room in which it is written. The changes are systematic. Education is reorganized. Administrative systems are streamlined. Financial institutions are stabilized. Everything begins to align. Scholars continue to debate whether these reforms were driven primarily by a desire for efficiency or by a deeper vision of social order. Some researchers from University of Oxford suggest that Napoleon sought to create a rational modern state grounded in clear laws and centralized authority. Others argue that these changes also served to consolidate his personal power. The distinction remains open to interpretation. You remain beside him as he reviews reports, listens to advisors, and makes decisions with a clarity that feels almost effortless. There is little hesitation. Each choice seems to follow naturally from the last. The city responds, gradually, quietly. You notice how daily life begins to stabilize. Markets operate with more consistency. Institutions regain structure. There is a sense of predictability, returning something that had been absent for years. A government record referenced by historians at University of Cambridge indicates that these reforms helped restore economic confidence and administrative efficiency across France. It is not dramatic in appearance, but its effects are far-reaching. You begin to understand that power is not only demonstrated through conquest but through organization, through systems that endure. The evenings feel calmer now, the sounds of the city settling into a steady rhythm. Carriages pass along cobblestone streets, their movements smooth and measured. The scent of evening air carries less tension, more quiet continuity. You stand beside him as he looks outward, not toward distant battlefields, but toward the structure of the nation itself. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether these reforms represented the fulfillment of revolutionary ideals or their transformation into something more controlled. Some voices from Stanford University suggest that the emphasis on merit and legal equality preserved key elements of the revolution. Others argue that the concentration of authority marked a departure from its original spirit. As you observe the balance between order and control, both perspectives feel present. For a moment, it feels as though time slows, allowing you to take in the full scope of what is unfolding. This is not temporary. This is foundation. You notice how he continues to work with the same intensity you saw on the battlefield, yet now directed towards systems rather than strategies. The discipline remains. The focus remains. Only the arena has changed. The light fades gently as evening deepens, casting a soft glow across the rooms where decisions continue to shape the future. Shadows stretch across polished surfaces, blending movement with stillness. You remain beside him, aware that this phase of his journey may be less visible than war, but no less significant, perhaps even more so, because these changes will outlast victories. They will persist beyond the moment. And as you stand there, listening to the quiet murmur of governance and the steady rhythm of a nation being reshaped, you begin to understand that power, when fully realized, is not only about rising, it is about building. The steady rhythm of governance settles into something almost ceremonial, as though the quiet work of reform has prepared the stage for a more visible expression of power. The air in Paris feels different, now charged not with unrest, but with anticipation. You remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte as events begin to gather toward a moment that feels both inevitable and carefully arranged. For a moment, it feels as though the entire city is holding its breath. The setting shifts to the grandeur of Notre Dame Cathedral, where light filters softly through tall windows, casting patterns across stone floors worn by centuries of footsteps. The scent of incense lingers in the air, mixing with the faint echo of movement and whispered conversation. This is no ordinary gathering. This is transformation made visible. You stand quietly as preparations unfold, noticing the deliberate nature of every detail, the arrangement of space, the presence of dignitaries, the symbolism embedded in each gesture. Nothing here is accidental. Records confirm that historians from University of Cambridge have emphasized the significance of Napoleon's coronation in 1804, marking the transition from first consul to emperor and signaling a new phase in French governance. It is both continuation and departure. You feel the weight of that shift settle around you. A curious footnote often noted by scholars is that during the ceremony, Napoleon crowned himself rather than allowing the Pope to do so. The moment is subtle in action, yet profound in meaning. Authority here is claimed directly. You watch as he lifts the crown, the movement calm, deliberate, almost restrained. There is no visible hesitation, no outward display of uncertainty. Just decision. The sound within the cathedral softens as though even the space itself acknowledges the significance of the moment. Light catches briefly on gold and fabric, then fades into the quiet stillness that follows. Scholars continue to debate the meaning of this act. Some researchers from Harvard University argue that it symbolized the culmination of revolutionary ideals, placing power in the hands of an individual who rose through merit. Others suggest that it marked a return to monarchical tradition, albeit in a new form. The interpretations shift depending on perspective. You remain beside him as the ceremony continues, aware that this is not merely a personal achievement, but a redefinition of authority itself. The atmosphere carries a strange balance, grandeur, control, and something quieter beneath both. A council record referenced by historians at University of Oxford indicates that the establishment of the empire formalized centralized power while maintaining certain administrative reforms introduced during the consulate. It is a blending of past and present structured carefully to appear both stable and legitimate. You begin to understand how symbols can reinforce reality. The crown does not create power, but it defines it. The ceremony concludes with a sense of completeness, yet also with the quiet awareness that something new has begun. The title of emperor carries expectations, responsibilities, and challenges that extend far beyond the walls of the cathedral. Outside, the city continues to move, though perhaps with a subtle shift in tone. The sound of carriage wheels on stone feels more measured, the conversations more deliberate. You stand beside him as he steps forward into this new role. His posture unchanged, his expression steady. There is no visible transformation, yet everything has changed. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether this moment represents the height of his ambition or merely another step in an ongoing ascent. Some voices from Princeton University suggest that the title of emperor fulfilled a long-developing vision. Others believe it was a strategic move, consolidating power in response to external and internal pressures. As you observe him now, both interpretations feel possible. The light outside softens as evening approaches, casting a gentle glow across the city. The scent of evening air carries a quiet calm, as though the world has accepted this new reality, at least for now. You remain beside him, aware that this moment, though grand, is not an end. It is a beginning. Power once claimed must be sustained, and beyond the borders of France, other nations are watching, waiting, measuring. The calm settles around you, but beneath it you sense movement already beginning again. Plans forming, strategies unfolding, the rhythm of expansion returning. And as you stand there, the echoes of ceremony fading into memory, you begin to understand that a crown is not a resting place. It is a responsibility, one that will soon be tested. The quiet grandeur of the coronation lingers only briefly before it gives way to movement once again. The air beyond France grows tense, as if the rest of Europe has been watching, waiting, and now begins to respond. You remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte as the calm of ceremony dissolves into the steady rhythm of preparation. Armies gather, alliances form, and the map of Europe begins to shift beneath your feet. For a moment, it feels as though you are standing at the center of a widening circle, where each movement outward creates new resistance. The scent of leather steel and damp earth returns familiar, now grounding you once more in the reality of campaign life. You travel with him across regions where borders blur and loyalties shift, where the old monarchies of Austria, Russia, and Prussia align against the expanding influence of France. This is no longer a single campaign. It is a continental struggle. Records confirm that historians from Yale University have emphasized how Napoleon's campaigns during this period redefined warfare through speed coordination and the effective use of core systems, allowing independent units to move and fight with remarkable flexibility. It is innovation in motion. You begin to sense how his earlier experiences converge here, forming a style of command that feels both instinctive and deliberate. He moves quickly, often faster than his opponents expect, forcing them to react rather than plan. The ground shifts beneath your feet as you follow the army through forests, rivers, and open plains. The sound of marching blends with the distant call of birds, and the occasional rumble of artillery being moved into position. Then the moment sharpens. The Battle of Austerlitz unfolds with a clarity that feels almost unreal. Mist hangs low over the landscape, softening outlines, obscuring movement, and within that uncertainty, he sees opportunity. A curious footnote, often mentioned by historians, is how Napoleon deliberately weakened his right flank, inviting the enemy to attack only to strike decisively at their centre once they committed. It is a risk, calculated, precise. You watch as the plan unfolds, not chaotically, but with a rhythm that feels almost choreographed. Units move into position, timing aligns, the enemy advances unaware of the trap forming around them. Then the shift, decisive, swift, complete. The outcome reshapes not only the battlefield, but the balance of power across Europe. A military record referenced by historians at University of Oxford indicates that Austerlitz is widely regarded as one of Napoleon's most brilliant victories, leading to the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and a significant reorganization of European territories. This is not just success, it is transformation. You feel the weight of that realization settle in. The map itself is changing. You continue with him as victories accumulate, each one reinforcing the momentum already in motion. Cities fall, treaties are signed, new alliances form, often out of necessity rather than choice. Scholars continue to debate whether his dominance during this period was sustainable or inherently unstable. Some researchers from Stanford University suggest that his rapid expansion created structural weaknesses that would later become difficult to manage. Others argue that his system of governance and military organization was adaptable enough to endure. The question remains open, echoing through time. You notice how he carries himself through these campaigns. Confident yet not careless, focused yet aware of the broader implications of each decision. The evenings bring brief moments of stillness where the sounds of the day fade into quiet reflection. The scent of campfires drifts through the air, soft and grounding, as soldiers rest between movements. You stand beside him as he studies maps once more, the flicker of firelight casting shifting shadows across the lines and markings that represent entire nations. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether this period represents the peak of his strategic genius or the beginning of overreach. Some voices from Princeton University emphasize the unparalleled success of his methods. Others point to the increasing complexity of maintaining control over such vast territories. As you observe him now, both possibilities seem quietly present. The night deepens, wrapping the landscape in calm, yet beneath it movement continues. Plans evolve, orders are prepared. The next campaign begins to take shape even before the current one fully settles. You remain beside him, aware that his empire is expanding not just in territory, but in influence, in reputation, in expectation. And with expansion comes attention, from allies, from enemies, from history itself. The calm settles in, but it carries with it a sense of tension, a quiet awareness that such momentum cannot continue indefinitely without consequence. Still he moves forward, always forward. The steady rhythm of victory begins to take on a different tone, one less defined by the clash of armies and more by the quiet tension of resistance that cannot be seen on a battlefield. As you remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte, you sense a shift in strategy, one that reaches beyond soldiers and terrain into the very structure of economies. The air feels heavier now, not with smoke, but with expectation. You move through a Europe that has been reshaped by conquest, where borders bend under pressure, and alliances hold together with careful calculation. Yet one force remains beyond direct control. Great Britain, an island protected by sea, sustained by trade, and resistant to the kind of warfare that has brought victory elsewhere. You can almost feel the distance, not just physical, but strategic. For a moment it feels as though the battlefield has dissolved into something less visible, yet equally powerful. Economic control. Records confirm that historians from Columbia University have emphasized that the continental system was designed to weaken Britain by restricting its trade with European nations under French influence. It is an ambitious plan, one that seeks to isolate rather than confront directly. You watch as decrees are issued, ports closed, goods restricted. The movement of ships, once constant and fluid, becomes constrained, monitored, redirected. The rhythm of commerce shifts, and with it the daily lives of countless people. A curious aside, often mentioned by historians, is how smuggling quickly became widespread as merchants and citizens sought ways around restrictions that disrupted their livelihoods. It is a reminder that control, no matter how carefully designed, often meets resistance in unexpected forms. You begin to notice the subtle consequences. Markets change, supplies fluctuate, conversations carry a different tone. The scent of spices, textiles, and imported goods becomes less common, replaced by the absence of what once was easily available. It is not dramatic, but it is persistent. Scholars continue to debate the effectiveness of the continental system. Some researchers from Harvard University argue that it placed significant economic pressure on Britain, forcing adjustments in trade patterns. Others suggest that it ultimately harmed continental economies more than it weakened its intended target. The balance of impact remains a subject of ongoing discussion. You remain beside him as he monitors these developments, aware that this form of conflict requires a different kind of attention. There are no clear victories here, no decisive battles to mark success. Instead, progress is measured in gradual shifts, in patterns that take time to reveal themselves. The atmosphere feels more complex, less immediate, yet no less consequential. A government record referenced by historians at University of Oxford indicates that enforcement of the continental system varied across regions, leading to inconsistencies that complicated its effectiveness. Control, it seems, is not uniform. You sense how this creates tension within the empire itself. Allies become reluctant participants. Some comply fully. Others resist, quietly maintaining trade through hidden channels. The sound of distant waves returns as you stand near a port watching ships anchored under new restrictions. The usual activity feels subdued, as though the flow of goods has slowed to a careful trickle. You begin to understand how power extends into everyday life, shaping not only grand events, but small personal experiences. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether the continental system represents strategic innovation or overextension. Some voices from Stanford University suggest that it demonstrated a willingness to adapt warfare beyond traditional boundaries. Others argue that it placed unsustainable pressure on allied nations, contributing to future resistance. As you observe the quiet strain building beneath the surface, both perspectives feel valid. The evenings carry a different kind of stillness now, less restful, more reflective. The scent of the sea mixes with the faint trace of goods that no longer arrive as they once did. You stand beside him as he considers the broader implications, his gaze steady, his posture unchanged. He does not abandon the strategy. He adjusts, refines, continues, because to stop would be to concede, and that is not something he does easily. The calm settles around you, but it feels layered, carrying within it the quiet movement of economies shifting, of resistance forming, of consequences unfolding slowly over time. You remain beside him, aware that this phase of his rule extends beyond the visible shaping, the unseen connections that bind nations together. And as you listen to the soft rhythm of water against the shore, you begin to understand that not all battles are fought with sound and motion. Some unfold in silence, and their outcomes can be just as profound. The quiet tension of economic warfare does not replace conflict, it deepens it. As you remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte, you begin to feel a subtle but undeniable shift spreading across Europe. The victories still exist, the authority still holds, yet something beneath the surface has begun to strain. Fatigue. It settles slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. You move through lands that once welcomed his armies as agents of change, but now carry a different mood. The air feels heavier, touched by the scent of worn earth and distant smoke. Conversations are quieter, less hopeful. For a moment it feels as though the rhythm of expansion has stretched too far. You notice how the demands of constant warfare ripple outward. Soldiers grow weary, resources thin, allies begin to question. Even success carries a cost, one that accumulates over time. Records confirm that historians from University of Chicago have emphasized how prolonged military campaigns during Napoleon's rule placed significant strain on both manpower and national economies across Europe. Victory, it seems, is not without consequence. You walk beside him through territories where control is maintained but not always embraced. The distinction is subtle yet important. Authority remains, yet loyalty begins to weaken. A curious aside, often mentioned in historical accounts, is the rise of resistance movements in regions such as Spain, where local populations opposed French influence through irregular warfare. These conflicts do not follow traditional patterns. They are unpredictable, persistent, and difficult to suppress fully. You sense how this changes the nature of conflict. It becomes less defined, more diffuse. Scholars continue to debate the extent to which these resistance movements contributed to the weakening of his empire. Some researchers from Harvard University argue that the Peninsular War drained resources and diverted attention from other strategic priorities. Others suggest that its impact, while significant, was part of a broader pattern of overextension. The discussion remains open, shaped by perspective. The sound of marching continues, but it feels different now. Less triumphant, more routine. The energy that once drove rapid victories begins to settle into something steadier, yet less dynamic. You remain beside him as he continues to lead his focus, unchanged, his decisions still precise, yet even here you sense the weight of accumulated responsibility. A government record referenced by historians at University of Cambridge indicates that maintaining control over vast territories required constant administrative and military attention, stretching the limits of centralized authority. The system remains functional, but increasingly complex. You begin to understand how expansion can create its own challenges, requiring constant reinforcement to sustain what has already been achieved. The evenings feel quieter now, not with peace but with reflection. The scent of campfires carries a softer tone, as though the energy of earlier campaigns has settled into a more subdued rhythm. You stand beside him as he studies maps once more, though the lines now represent not just opportunity, but obligation. Each region requires attention. Each decision carries broader implications. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether this period marks the beginning of decline or simply a natural phase within a larger cycle of power. Some voices from Princeton University suggest that the strain of continuous conflict began to erode the stability of his empire. Others argue that such pressures were inevitable and manageable within the context of his leadership. As you observe the quiet persistence of these challenges, both interpretations feel possible. The air cools as night settles, bringing with it a calm that feels heavier than before. Not oppressive, but weighted with awareness. You remain beside him, aware that the path forward is no longer defined solely by expansion. It is shaped by endurance, by the ability to sustain what has been built. The distant sound of wind moves gently across the landscape, carrying with it the faint echo of earlier triumphs. They are not forgotten, but they feel farther away now, softened by time and distance. And yet he continues, always forward, but perhaps with a different understanding. That power once extended across vast distances must also be maintained across them. And that task is no less demanding than conquest itself. The quiet strain that has been building across Europe begins to draw your attention eastward, where the horizon stretches wide and distant, almost impossibly far. The air grows cooler as you travel beside Napoleon Bonaparte toward Russia, a land that feels less like a destination and more like a test. For a moment, it feels as though the world itself has expanded. The landscape opens into vast plains where the sky seems larger, the distances longer, and the silence deeper. The scent of earth replaces the familiar mixture of campfire and movement, grounding you in a setting that resists quick understanding. This is not Italy, not Austria, not any place you have travelled before. Records confirm that historians from University of Oxford have emphasised the immense scale of Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812, involving one of the largest armies ever assembled in Europe at that time. It is ambition expressed through magnitude. You sense it immediately. The size, the complexity, the risk. You remain beside him as the army advances its movement steady, yet stretched across distances that feel difficult to comprehend. Supplies follow, wagons creak, horses strain, the rhythm of progress becomes slower, more deliberate. A curious aside, often noted by historians, is the Russian strategy of retreat and scorched earth, where villages and resources were abandoned or destroyed to deny the advancing army sustenance. It is not a direct confrontation, it is absence used as defense. You begin to feel the effect of that absence. Food grows scarce, shelter becomes uncertain, the land itself seems to withdraw. Scholars continue to debate whether Napoleon underestimated the logistical challenges of the campaign, or whether the unpredictable nature of Russian resistance made such planning inherently difficult. Some researchers from Harvard University suggest that overconfidence played a role. Others argue that the scale of the operation would have challenged any commander. The discussion remains open, shaped by perspective. You walk beside him as the army moves deeper, the initial confidence gradually giving way to a quieter, more cautious awareness. The distances stretch further than expected, the pace slows, the environment becomes a factor as significant as any opposing force. The approach to Moscow carries a sense of anticipation, though it feels different from earlier campaigns, less certain, more restrained. When the city is reached, it does not offer the resolution that might have been expected. It is largely abandoned, silent. The scent of smoke rises again, but not from battle, from fire. The city burns. A government record referenced by historians at University of Cambridge indicates that the destruction of Moscow deprived Napoleon's forces of the resources they had anticipated, forcing a critical reassessment of the campaign. It is a turning point, though not immediately recognized as such. You stand beside him in that moment, aware that the situation has shifted in ways that cannot be easily reversed. Time passes, decisions are weighed, and then the retreat begins. The cold arrives gradually at first, then, with increasing intensity. The air sharpens, breath becomes visible, movement grows heavier. You feel it in your hands, in your face, in the slow rhythm of each step. The retreat is not marked by a single moment, but by a series of challenges that accumulate. Supplies diminish further. The landscape offers little relief. The army, once vast and powerful, begins to thin. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether the Russian campaign represents the decisive turning point in Napoleon's fortunes or one of several contributing factors. Some voices from Princeton University emphasize the scale of loss and its impact on future campaigns. Others suggest that, while significant, it was part of a broader pattern of strain already present. As you observe the slow unfolding of hardship, both perspectives feel grounded. The nights grow colder, quieter, more difficult. You remain beside him as he continues to lead his composure intact, his focus steady, despite the circumstances. Yet even here you sense the weight of what is being lost. Not just soldiers, but momentum. The distant sound of wind moves across the open land, carrying with it a sense of vastness that feels almost indifferent to human effort. You begin to understand that this is not a battle that can be won through strategy alone. It is endurance against environment, against distance, against time. The calm settles around you, though it carries a deeper tone now, one shaped by awareness rather than certainty. And as you walk beside him through the cold expanse, you sense that this campaign will not be remembered for its beginning, but for its cost. The cold of the retreat lingers in your memory as you feel the world begin to close in from multiple directions. The vast silence of Russia fades behind you, but its consequences travel with you, settling quietly into every step beside Napoleon Bonaparte. For a moment, it feels as though the balance has shifted, not suddenly, but unmistakably. You move back across Europe where the atmosphere has changed in ways that are subtle yet profound. Nations that once hesitated now begin to gather with renewed purpose. Alliances strengthen, resolve deepens. The opposition is no longer fragmented, it is unified. Records confirm that historians from University of Oxford have emphasized how the losses suffered during the Russian campaign emboldened other European powers to form the Sixth Coalition, bringing together forces from multiple nations against Napoleon. It is not just resistance, it is coordination. You sense it immediately. The scale, the intention, the determination. You remain beside him as he responds with the same discipline and focus you have seen before. New armies are raised, strategies are revised, movement resumes, yet something feels different. A curious aside, often mentioned by historians, is how quickly he managed to rebuild his forces after the Russian campaign, drawing upon remaining resources and reorganizing command structures. It is a testament to his ability to adapt even in the face of significant loss. But rebuilding is not the same as restoring. You begin to feel that distinction. Scholars continue to debate whether Napoleon's strategic abilities remained at their peak during this period, or whether the cumulative strain of years of conflict began to affect decision-making. Some researchers from Harvard University argue that his responses were still highly effective under difficult conditions. Others suggest that the challenges he faced exceeded what even his skills could overcome. The discussion remains open, shaped by interpretation. The landscape around you reflects this shift. Fields once quiet now carry the movement of opposing forces. Roads fill with troops moving in multiple directions. The sound of marching becomes layered, overlapping, complex. You follow him into engagements that feel less decisive than those of earlier years. Battles occur, victories and losses interwoven, yet none seem to restore the clear momentum that once defined his campaigns. The air carries the scent of damp earth and distant smoke, familiar yet heavier now, as though layered with the memory of what has come before. A military record referenced by historians at University of Cambridge indicates that the Battle of Leipzig marked a significant defeat involving a coalition of forces that overwhelmed Napoleon's army. It is one of the largest battles you have encountered on this journey. You stand at the edge of that moment feeling its weight. The scale is immense, the outcome decisive, and the implications far-reaching. You notice how, even in defeat, he remains composed, his attention already turning toward what must come next. There is no visible collapse, no surrender of will, no, only recalculation. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether the defeat at Leipzig marked the true collapse of his empire or simply accelerated an inevitable decline. Some voices from Princeton University emphasize its strategic importance in breaking French dominance. Others suggest that the broader pattern of coalition resistance was already decisive, as you observe the aftermath. Both perspectives seem intertwined. The movement continues, but the direction has changed. You begin to feel it in the way armies advance toward France itself, rather than away from it. The boundaries that once expanded now contract. The sense of control narrows. The evenings grow quieter, though not with peace, with anticipation, with the awareness that events are converging towards something unavoidable. You remain beside him as he returns to Paris, where the atmosphere carries both loyalty and uncertainty. The city that once stabilized under his rule now faces the possibility of change once more. The scent of rain touches the air, soft and steady, as though marking the passage of time. In a world that continues to shift, you stand with him in that quiet moment, aware that the empire he built is no longer expanding. It is being tested from every direction. The calm settles around you, but it feels fragile, as though it could dissolve at any moment. And as you remain beside him, you begin to understand that power, once challenged on multiple fronts, must confront not only external forces but its own limits. The path ahead is no longer defined by ambition alone, it is shaped by survival. The tension that surrounds you now feels quieter, more contained, as though the world has drawn a long breath after years of relentless motion. The familiar presence of Paris begins to fade behind you, replaced by the gentle isolation of Elba. You remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte as the scale of his surroundings contracts in a way that feels almost surreal. For a moment, it feels as though time itself has slowed. The island is quiet. The air carries the scent of salt and sun-warmed stone, softer than the tension-filled landscapes you have travelled through before. The sound of waves returns steady and familiar, echoing faintly against the shore. Yet the contrast is striking. From emperor of vast territories to ruler of a small island, you sense how this shift settles into the atmosphere, not loudly, but with a quiet weight. Records confirm that historians from University of Oxford have emphasized that Napoleon retained a degree of authority on Elba, governing the island and implementing minor reforms despite his exile. It is a reduced stage, but not an empty one. You notice how he adapts even here. The habits remain: structure, routine, attention to detail. A curious aside often mentioned in historical accounts is how he took interest in improving roads, agriculture, and local administration on the island, approaching these tasks with the same focus he once applied to far larger systems. It reveals something consistent within him. Scale changes. Approach does not. You walk beside him along narrow paths overlooking the sea, the horizon stretching outward in a way that feels both open and limiting at once. The scent of herbs drifts through the air, carried gently by the breeze. For a moment it feels almost peaceful, almost restful. Scholars continue to debate the nature of his mindset during this period. Some researchers from Harvard University suggest that he viewed Elba as a temporary pause, maintaining awareness of events in Europe and considering future possibilities. Others argue that he may have initially accepted his circumstances, at least outwardly, adapting to a quieter existence. The truth remains layered, shaped by interpretation. You remain beside him as he moves through daily routines, inspecting projects, meeting local inhabitants, maintaining a sense of order within this limited domain. There is no visible despair, only control. A government record referenced by historians at University of Cambridge indicates that he maintained a small personal guard and administrative structure, reinforcing the impression that even in exile, he did not relinquish authority entirely. It is a continuation of identity, though on a smaller scale. You begin to sense how difficult it is to separate the man from the role he has played for so long. The evenings bring a gentle stillness, the sound of waves blending with the faint rustle of leaves. The sky deepens into soft shades of blue and gold, creating a calm that feels almost timeless. You stand beside him in that quiet, aware that reflection may exist here, though not always visible. The past lingers not as a burden alone, but as a presence that shapes thought and perspective. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether this period represents genuine introspection or merely a strategic pause. Some voices from Princeton University suggest that he used this time to reassess and plan. Others believe that his situation limited his ability to act, creating a temporary stillness rather than a deliberate one, as you observe him now. Both possibilities feel close. The calm of the island continues steady and consistent, yet beneath it you sense something unresolved. Movement waiting to return. You notice how he watches the horizon at times, his gaze steady, as though measuring distance not just in miles but in possibility. The world beyond Elba has not stopped. Europe continues to shift. power continues to realign, and he remains aware. The scent of the sea deepens as night approaches, wrapping the island in a quiet that feels both peaceful and temporary. You remain beside him, aware that this moment, though, still is not final. It is a pause, a narrowing of space before expansion returns. And as you listen to the gentle rhythm of waves against the shore, you begin to understand that even in exile, his story continues. Not loudly, not yet, but inevitably. The quiet rhythm of the sea begins to change almost imperceptibly at first, as though something beneath the calm surface has started to move again. You remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte on Elba, where the stillness that once felt complete now carries a different tone. Expectation. For a moment it feels as though the horizon itself is calling. You notice how his attention sharpens once more, the quiet routines of island life giving way to renewed focus. News arrives from France carried across the water in fragments. Reports of dissatisfaction, of shifting political structures, of a nation that has not settled as firmly as hoped. The calm begins to break. Records confirm that historians from University of Cambridge have emphasized that Napoleon's return in 1815 was made possible in part by the instability of the restored monarchy, which struggled to maintain widespread support. The conditions once again create opportunity. You feel it clearly, the same pattern, the same recognition, a moment to act. A curious aside often mentioned by historians is how relatively small his initial force was when he left Elba, yet it grew rapidly as he advanced through France, gaining support from soldiers and civilians alike. It is not just movement, it is momentum returning. You follow him as he departs the island, the sound of waves fading behind you, replaced by the steady rhythm of footsteps once more. The air feels different now, charged with purpose. The landing in southern France unfolds without immediate resistance. Instead, something unexpected occurs. Soldiers sent to stop him hesitate, then join him. You stand beside him as he approaches them, not with force, but with presence, offering a simple, direct appeal. The moment feels suspended, balance between conflict and recognition. Then the shift. They choose him. Scholars continue to debate how much of this response was driven by loyalty to Napoleon versus dissatisfaction with the existing government. Some researchers from Harvard University suggest that his personal reputation and leadership style inspired genuine allegiance. Others argue that broader political frustrations played a significant role. The truth remains intertwined. You move with him toward Paris, where his return unfolds with a speed that feels almost unreal. The distance closes quickly. Resistance dissolves. Authority shifts once more. The 100 days begin, a period brief in duration yet immense in intensity. A government record referenced by historians at University of Oxford indicates that Napoleon resumed power with remarkable efficiency, re-establishing control over administrative and military structures in a matter of weeks. It is a rapid restoration built upon existing foundations. You begin to sense how deeply those foundations remain. The evenings carry a familiar energy, now the quiet replaced by movement, by planning, by preparation. The scent of ink and paper returns, mingling with the distant sounds of military organization. Yet beneath this renewed momentum you feel something else. Urgency. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether Napoleon's return was a calculated attempt to regain lasting power or a final gamble driven by circumstance. Some voices from Stanford University suggest that he believed he could stabilize France once more. Others argue that the geopolitical realities made long-term success unlikely, as you stand beside him now. Both possibilities feel present. The nations of Europe do not remain still. They respond quickly. Alliances reform. Armies gather once again. The calm that followed his exile proves temporary, replaced by a renewed convergence of forces. You remain beside him as preparations unfold, aware that this moment carries both familiarity and difference. He has returned to power, yet the circumstances are more compressed, more immediate. The margin for error feels smaller, the time shorter. The night settles over the city, carrying a sense of anticipation that feels sharper than before. The air holds a quiet tension, as though everything is moving toward a single defining moment. You stand beside him, aware that this is not simply a continuation of what came before. It is a final movement, a gathering of everything that has shaped his journey. The calm settles briefly, but it is not restful. It is the stillness before decision. And as you listen to the distant sounds of preparation echo through the night, you begin to understand that this return is not just about reclaiming power. It is about confronting what remains unresolved. The tension that has been gathering now settles into a single direction, drawing you steadily northward across fields that seem calm at first glance, yet carry the weight of what is to come. The air feels cool, touched by early summer, and the scent of damp grass rises softly beneath your steps. You remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte as everything narrows toward one place. Waterloo. For a moment it feels deceptively ordinary. Rolling hills, open ground, a quiet landscape waiting. Yet beneath that calm lies convergence. Armies from across Europe drawn together with a single purpose. The movement of forces becomes focused, precise, unavoidable. Records confirm that historians from University of Cambridge have emphasised how the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 marked the decisive end of Napoleon's rule, bringing together coalition forces under coordinated leadership to confront him directly. This is not another campaign. This is conclusion. You sense it immediately. The scale is contained, yet the significance immense. You move with him as preparations unfold, the sound of distant artillery being positioned, the quiet murmur of soldiers readying themselves for what lies ahead. The ground is soft from recent rain, the earth slightly yielding beneath each step. It matters. Even small details matter here. A curious aside often mentioned by historians is how the muddy conditions delayed the French attack, affecting the timing of movements that would prove critical as the battle unfolded. It is a reminder that even the environment plays a role in shaping events. You remain beside him as the morning advances, the light slowly lifting across the field. The stillness fades, replaced by the first movements of engagement. Then the sound begins. Artillery, measured, rhythmic. The battle unfolds not as a single moment, but as a series of shifting engagements, each one building upon the last. You notice how he directs forces with the same clarity that defined earlier victories, yet the circumstances feel tighter, more constrained. Scholars continue to debate the factors that led to the outcome at Waterloo. Some researchers from Harvard University emphasize the resilience and coordination of coalition forces, particularly the arrival of reinforcements at a critical moment. Others point to strategic decisions and timing as contributing elements. The interpretations vary, but the result remains clear. You watch as the day progresses, the rhythm of battle intensifying, then shifting, then intensifying again. There are moments where success seems possible, where the familiar pattern of momentum begins to emerge. And then it changes, gradually at first, then unmistakably. A military record referenced by historians at University of Oxford indicates that the arrival of Prussian forces late in the battle played a decisive role in tipping the balance against Napoleon's army. It is not a sudden collapse, but a turning of weight. You feel it in the movement of troops, in the changing tone of commands, in the subtle shift from control to resistance. The ground that once held possibility now carries uncertainty. You remain beside him as the realization settles, though it is not expressed outwardly. His posture remains steady, his focus does not waver, yet the outcome begins to take shape. Arguments split along different lines among historians regarding whether Waterloo represents a failure of strategy, circumstance, or inevitability. Some voices from Princeton University suggest that a combination of factors converged in ways that could not be fully controlled. Others argue that earlier decisions set the stage for this result. As you observe the unfolding scene, it feels less like a single cause and more like a convergence. The light begins to fade as the day draws toward its end, casting long shadows across the field. The sounds of battle soften, replaced by a quieter, heavier stillness. The outcome is no longer in question. You stand beside him in that moment, aware that this is not just the end of a battle, it is the end of an era. The air feels different now, still, resolved. You begin to understand that all the movement, all the ambition, all the expansion has led to this point where direction no longer extends outward, but comes to rest. He remains composed, even now. Even here, the calm settles around you, though it carries a finality that has not been present before. And as you look across the quieting field, you sense that what has ended will continue to echo far beyond this place. Not in conquest, but in memory. The quiet that follows feels deeper than any silence you've encountered before. It is not the calm of rest, nor the pause between movements. It is something more final. As you remain beside Napoleon Bonaparte, the world seems to narrow once again, carrying you far from the fields of Waterloo to a distant, isolated point in the vastness of the ocean. St. Helena. For a moment, it feels almost unreal. The air is different here, cooler, heavier with moisture, touched by the scent of salt and wind that never quite settles. The land rises sharply from the sea, steep and enclosed, offering no easy horizon to follow. This is where his journey comes to rest, not in triumph, but in distance. Records confirm that historians from University of Cambridge have emphasized that St. Helena was chosen precisely for its isolation, making escape nearly impossible, and ensuring that Napoleon could no longer influence European affairs. It is containment, deliberate and complete. You walk beside him along narrow paths bordered by rugged terrain, the sound of waves constant yet distant below. The world feels smaller here, contained within the boundaries of the island, and yet his presence does not diminish. A curious aside, often mentioned by historians, is how he dictated accounts of his life and campaigns during his exile, shaping the narrative that would carry his legacy forward. Even here, far removed from power, he continues to influence how he will be remembered. You begin to notice the rhythm of his days, measured, structured. Not unlike before, though, quieter. Scholars continue to debate the accuracy of these recollections. Some researchers from Harvard University suggest that his accounts emphasized certain events, while minimizing others, creating a version of history that aligned with his perspective. Others argue that they provide valuable insight into his mindset and motivations. The truth, as always, remains layered. The air carries the faint scent of damp earth and vegetation, different from the dry heat of Egypt or the cold expanse of Russia. It is a new environment, one that does not demand conquest, but acceptance. You remain beside him as time passes in a way that feels less urgent. Days blend gently into one another. The intensity of earlier years softens into reflection. A government record referenced by historians at University of Oxford indicates that Napoleon's health declined during his years on St. Helena, leading to his death in 1821. It is a quiet end, far removed from the scale of his earlier life. You sense the contrast deeply, from vast armies to solitary paths, From shifting continents to a fixed horizon, arguments split along different lines among historians regarding the long-term legacy of his rule. Some voices from Princeton University emphasize his role in spreading legal reforms and modern administrative systems across Europe. Others point to the immense human cost of his wars. As you stand here, both perspectives feel present, neither fully outweighing the other. The evenings on the island bring a soft stillness, the sky dimming gradually as the sound of wind moves steadily across the land. The scent of the sea remains constant, grounding you in this final setting. You remain beside him as his story reaches its close, aware that while his physical journey ends here, his influence does not. It continues, in laws, in memory, in the shape of nations that were once altered by his presence. The calm settles fully now, not as anticipation, but as completion. And as you stand there looking out across the vast ocean that both separates and connects the world, you begin to understand that history does not end with a single life. It extends outward, carried by those who remember, by those who study, by those who listen. And tonight you have walked that path from beginning to end, tracing the arc of a life that rose from uncertainty to power and from power to reflection. Now let that story rest gently in your mind. Let it soften, let it drift, and as sleep approaches, carry with you not just the events, but the quiet understanding that even the greatest journeys eventually find stillness. Word count 1153. As you settle into the calm that follows this long journey, take a gentle moment to reflect on what stayed with you most. Perhaps it was the quiet determination of a young outsider, or the sweeping momentum of victories that reshaped an entire continent. Maybe it was the stillness at the end, where power gave way to reflection, and the vast story of a life softened into something more human. If something in this story lingered with you, I would truly love to hear it. Share in the comments what moment or feeling stayed closest to you, and where in the world you're listening from tonight. There is something quietly beautiful in knowing that stories like this travel across time and distance, connecting us in ways that feel both small and meaningful. And if you found yourself drawn into this journey, there is more waiting for you. Another story, another world, another night of calm exploration is just a step away on the channel. Let curiosity guide you there when you are ready. For now, rest. Blessings to you and your family.